know but my history and but our history. And I think the only way you can help to address fears is not just with words, but by our actions. That we are people that when we see other people attacked, if you see a woman being demeaned or degraded and you're a fella, if you sit there and do nothing, you are complicit in what is going on. It is not enough in life to say, I'm not a racist. If racism exists, you need to be anti-racist. You need to be actively against it. It's not enough to say, I'm not an anti-Semite. You need to be actively working against anti-Semitism. Because when dignity is denied to one American, it's an assault on the dignity of all Americans. And so the only way I know how to do this is to continue my activism every single day. And it doesn't have to be large actions all the time. Well, I'm a senator, so I speak to these issues all the time. I introduce legislation to try to protect people. The fact that Betsy DeVos and the Justice Department are rolling back protections for LGBTQ youth is outrageous and unacceptable. I want to fight that. But I want to work. We need to work in our own communities right now. We need to work right now in our own communities to strengthen the bonds between us, to reach out to people who pray differently than us, that look differently than us, find out how you can be a better ally, find out how in the cause of justice you can be a better accomplice. And then the last thing I'll say is one of the reasons why I am running for president is an answer to this question. I cannot sit still and watch someone preach bigotry and hate, divisiveness, who literally started their campaign for president trying to blame Mexicans and Muslims and others for our problems. And I am fighting to build an America that we have as a better community.
So one of the things...
I just want to say, I started my career as a city councilman. I have great respect for city council people. And I know one of the great challenges and joys of being a city council person is that when you go to the supermarket, you really have to allocate like an hour more than usual. You may just be going to pick up a carton of milk, but you got to get ready. You got to make sure you have a pen with you to write things down. We're going to stop you. So I know your wife and kids are backstage, but when you don't come home on time, I hope they give you the sympathy and deference that you deserve for your position.
Working on that.
Okay.
I'm never getting home on time, but one of the things, and this relates to what you said, you know, one of the challenges that we have as a community, and it's not just Des Moines, it's our entire metro, is figuring out how to provide more affordable housing. And that's a critical issue, and it's an issue where we need partners, including at the federal level. And so I was hoping that you'd talk about what we can do to work on solving our affordable housing challenges.
So I had the privilege of being invited to your home, and this is one of the issues that we actually talked about a little bit more. It's issues sort of in my bailiwick. I started an illegal clinic at Yale dealing with these issues. I moved to Newark to take on slumlords and try to preserve housing. As a guy who's had their family denied housing, is an issue that I take very seriously. And we've gotten to a point in America where you see middle-class families spending 30, 40, 50% of their income just trying to provide housing for their families. And we're finding lots of people who are doing great jobs who can't even afford to live in the communities that they're working. What a shameful thing it is for us as a nation to have teachers who teach in communities who aren't getting paid enough money to often live in those communities. And so I think a lot about housing, and I don't want to get technical with folks because there are a lot of streams of resources for localities that you and I know about, for low-income housing tax credits and more. But I want to make an argument for just overall federal funding for affordable housing. And that's something that can be controversial, but I think the federal government can do a lot in this space. And the one area of housing I want to talk about, because when we talk about housing, we often leave people out of the equation, and I can tell you, I can give, we were able to double the production of affordable housing and workforce housing. But there's one housing that was always a struggle for me, and that is supportive housing for Americans with special needs. And one of the things we do, and one of the things I want to let you all know about is we've got to get, especially those of us in this room that say we're progressives, immediately people think you're fiscally irresponsible. Well, I'm going to tell you right now, progressives are the most fiscally responsible folks because the issues we fight for, and I'm going to give you data. When I was mayor, I used to always say, God we trust. Everybody else give me data. I'm going to give you numbers in a second, but doing the morally right thing to do on housing, especially special needs housing, is also for a city the fiscally responsible thing to do as well. And our federal government, who should be looking to invest in people, we used to be a nation that did that. Invested in infrastructure, grows your economy, dollar invested, more than $2 return. Invested in education, in a global knowledge-based society, you invest in education, you invest in the success of all. $1 invested in education in prisons lowers taxpayer expenses $4. We used to invest in research and development. Now the NIH and other organizations that do critical research are starving for dollars, but $1 invested there produces multiples. But housing issues, why should localities be struggling so much to do what's best for their company? Seattle, Washington did a study for mentally ill Americans with mental illness, who get stigma and shame cast upon them. Homeless mentally ill folks, they decided to do a simple study of what it costs for them to live on the streets homeless versus supportive housing. Supportive housing is very expensive for those of you who don't know housing. But they did a study, they took 23 people from the streets, calculated their total costs for the year before they were put in supportive housing and then the year after. And just net, they compared them, and they found out that they saved taxpayers $1 million for just 23 people for that year, just by having them. Why? Where do mentally ill Americans often end up if they're left on the streets? Hospital emergency rooms, I heard somebody yell, absolutely, tremendously expensive. Somebody else over here said jails, absolutely. We are a country that sends, you want to know our character of our country? Look at our jails and prisons. Other countries, they imprison the media. Don't worry back there, we don't do that in America, even though they call you the enemy. Other countries, they lock up political prisoners. Don't worry, even though they say lock her up. We haven't gotten there, we're never gonna get there. But we imprison the vulnerable, the mentally ill, the addicted, the poor, and minorities. And that's so expensive. More expensive than treatment, more expensive than housing. And so this is a crisis that I will have a lot of depth on. And we've talked about a lot of things, from dealing with exclusionary zoning. It often undermines the ability for some communities to take fair shares of affordable housing. This is a lot of ways we can use the tax code to incentivize investment. I'm very proud that one of the most significant pieces of legislation I got done, I don't think there's one here in Des Moines, but there is in Iowa's opportunity zones, which allow tremendous tax incentives to invest in the lowest income parts of America. It will be, mark my words, this is not being braggadocious, but the most significant economic development bill for low-income areas in America in the last generation because of the way we structure the tax code. There's a lot of things we can do, but my appeal is going to be is for this nation to remember that we should always measure ourselves by the most vulnerable communities. And what we're doing to those populations I just discussed is not only morally objectionable, it is actually costing our society more. It's costing us our moral standing as well as our taxpayer dollars.
Really fortunate in Iowa to have the opportunity to have so many presidential candidates come and spend time with us, and you know, people love having a chance to get up close and personal and meet you. There are a lot of candidates so far this year, some of them your colleagues in the Senate. So what went into your decision to decide to run, and then how do you set yourself apart when it's such a crowded field?
A haircut, I think, maybe. I have friends in this race, people I've stood side by side with in a saddle. I was a mayor for a long period of time. There are some former mayors, the mayor of South Bend, the former mayor of San Antonio. There are a lot of good Democrats, and God bless that we have lots of choices. So the first thing I'll say before we go anywhere, something we should all agree on now, is that whoever ends up being the nominee, we all support that nominee. And that's going to be my pledge, but I really appreciate you asking the question about what distinguishes me in this race. And so the first thing is, as a lot of my colleagues have different lines of experience, I had a very different line of experience. Like the Wall Street Journal said, there's only 21 Americans that have ever done sort of the career path I've done, ever gone from being a big city mayor to going to be a United States Senator. And I was a mayor during a very difficult time in America. I was running a city during a recession. And the country has a recession. Inner cities have depression-like circumstances. And I had to turn that city around at a time that people were giving up on Newark and said what we couldn't do. And so one of the things that we distinguished ourselves is we took on the most difficult problems. Our school system had dramatically failing schools, and now we're the #1 city in America for beat the odds schools, high poverty, high performance. Our city had a tremendous problem that we were losing businesses were closing, and I had to think of strategies and work with other people to get investment to come back to our city, and to do it in a way that didn't gentrify our city and move out the people that lived there. And so we thought of a lot of creative strategies, and I went all around the country trying to work with folks to come to the city of Newark and build supermarkets and food deserts. We hadn't had a new hotel built in our city in 40 years, and we got it done. But we got it done on our terms. When developers came, we got unions to come to the table, developers to come to the table, people with the resources to invest in those, and we sat everybody around and basically discussed the rules. You're gonna build and construct here, you're gonna use local residents who are often cut out. That means people with criminal convictions. That means giving people shots to go off and get them. I want apprenticeship programs for our kids to make sure that our young people are getting pathways to careers. Long story short, by the time I was leaving Newark to go to be a United States Senator, we were only about 6% of the state's population, but 1 out of every 3 permits being taken out in the entire state of New Jersey for residential construction and commercial construction were going on in the state of New Jersey. So I could go on, but I want people to examine the track record of taking on the toughest problems in our country and actually showing that they can be solved. And even in the United States Senate, from the bills I've already mentioned, that are going to drive billions of dollars into low-income communities in this country of new development, new investment, to passing comprehensive criminal justice reform. I am somebody that's going to distinguish myself by having a record of taking on tough problems and getting things done. And the last thing I'm going to distinguish myself on is there are going to be different theories of how you fight in this election. Everybody's tough. I know there's a lot of great fighters there. But I've learned that when I come to being tough, I never want people to think that in order to be tough, you have to be mean. In order to be strong, you have to be cruel. I want to campaign like I want to govern, which is not just saying we're going to beat the Republican nominee. Yeah, maybe I'm running to join others and making sure we do that. That's important. But the larger call, which you're going to hear me talking about, is not just how we beat Republicans, but how we unite all Americans in the cause of our country. And so, it'll be all about a revival of civic grace, trying to create that beloved community so that we can unite as a nation again and deal with the persistent injustices and lack of fairness in our country.
Okay, so I got a text during I was listening closely, but I did get a text that said that I am the last question before we go to a couple questions from the crowd. And I go on Twitter every now and then.
Yes.
And no, it's not good. And you know what Twitter tells me? Twitter tells me positive's not going to win this time.
Yes.
Can you tell us why it will?
Look, I hear this all the time. You know, again, like I said before, people want to fight fire with fire. I am sorry. The people we respect in our history that we often laud as some of our greatest heroes are people who were tough, who were strong, who took on bullies, who took on folks that were mean and bigoted. And they took them on not by emulating what they were against, but by demonstrating what they were for. Yeah. And my greatest heroes, John Lewis, who I mentioned already, he didn't bring out some fire hoses and some dogs to take on the opposition that he had. If you fought them like that, that was exactly what people wanted.